the huddle is really all about being a supportive growth channel for HCD or HCDC clients and alumni. Every month we've got a topic that we like to feature, and then we want to bring in people that can speak, on that topic to help equip you with tools, know-how, insights to move your business forward. This month is all about wellness. It's National Wellness Month, but we're taking a broad view of wellness and thinking about it from the standpoint of not only personal wellness, but how to build organizations that are well. And so we've got two great speakers. Nicole Armstrong, she's the CEO of Queen City Certified. They're focused on elevating equity at work. I enjoy working with Nicole. She's an HCDC client, and so like to obviously feature HCDC clients as well. She's going to kick things off and share her perspective and the insights that she's kind of garnered leading Queen City Certified here locally in Cincinnati. And then after about 40 minutes, we're going to hand it off to Bob Gilbreath. Bob is a multi-time founder. He is currently CEO and co-founder of Hearty. If you haven't joined Hearty, you should go be in good company and join the platform. Bob also is a former P&G'er and exited a company called Ahology here in Cincinnati. So he's going to talk about building strong, high-performing teams. And so he'll close things out, and then I'll come back on and provide a preview for next month. So with that, are there any questions from anybody? We're recording the session, so it can be accessed later by others who couldn't make it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. So as Paul mentioned, my name is Nicole Armstrong. I'm the founder and CEO of Queen City Certified. Excited to be with you all today. My organization exists because talent isn't limited by identities like gender, race, or sexual orientation, but opportunity often is. And I'd like to share this little stat because I think it's a bit mind-blowing. So when we think about a final pool of 4 candidates, if there's only one woman or one person of color, they statistically have 0 chance of getting hired. Yeah, 0 chance. And so we are at Queen City Certified, the nation's first employer certification and leadership program for workplace equity. Our goal is to really help businesses create workplaces where people not only want to work, but can thrive. So we're thinking about well-being, particularly when it comes to workplace culture. And we do that using data, community building, and third-party certification. In many ways, we're sector agnostic. Employers have a lot in common, regardless of what sector they're in. So we work with employers of all sizes and from diverse sectors, including manufacturing and law, philanthropy, arts and culture, government, you name it. Now, the business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion has already been made. We know that companies with the highest representation of women in top management experience 34% greater returns. And racially and ethnically diverse companies are 35% more likely to have financial returns above industry averages. We're talking about building high-performing teams today. And did you know that diverse teams are better at actually making decisions? So in fact, research has found that decisions made and executed by diverse teams deliver 60% better results than teams that are homogenous. So it's really important when we're thinking about the impact, not only on our businesses, but on our business results. We also know that 67% of job seekers consider workplace diversity when deciding where to work. So creating a diverse and inclusive workplace is a business imperative. It's not really a nice to have. And that's why it seems like everyone is talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion today. We've all seen graphics like this on social media. A lot of employers are talking the talk, but we actually help them walk the talk. So systemic challenges actually require systems level solutions. Now, you might be wondering, what do you mean by that, right? Well, a lot of our systems have been designed as if the white male experience is universal. It's the reason pictures of named men in high school history textbooks actually outnumber pictures of named women by 18 to 100. And it's why Alexa and Siri often don't recognize the voice commands of people with accents. Less than a quarter of our children's books contain characters from diverse backgrounds. And it's why so many workplaces offer programs to help women and people of color lean in or gain confidence or build leadership skills, right? But I have never found a workplace that offers a program to help white, able-bodied, cisgendered white men be less overconfident. If you know of one, let me know, because that would be interesting for sure. Of course, there's nothing wrong with being white and male, but when we treat a singular experience as universal, we end up creating systems of disadvantage. We end up focusing on helping people adapt to systems that were actually never designed with them in mind. And then those biases are built into our workplace policies and practices, often unintentionally, but they can have consequences that follow a person throughout their lifetime. So it's really important that we design workplaces that promote equity in order to respect and embrace difference. Now, equity and equality are often used interchangeably, but they aren't actually the same thing. So if I were to tell you that in appreciation of your attendance today, you'll receive this pair of shoes in a size 10, how many of you could use them? So you can do that, just drop it in the chat. How many of you could use these shoes in a size 10? Anyone? That's very nice, Paul. You could get, does your wife wear a size 10? Could she actually use them? Maybe not. Maybe not. But that's the difference between equity and equality, right? Equality is giving everybody the same thing. Equity is actually giving people what they need. So there's a difference in how we approach fairness and justice when we think about equity versus equality. And equality really only works when everyone is starting from the same place. And so if equality is our goal, equity is how we get there. It's the foundation of how we get there. So we help leaders actually invest in strategies that have been proven to promote equity. We help them redesign their systems, not their people. So we leverage data collected through our proprietary policy assessments and employee surveys to develop tangible action plans that deliver results. And then we provide ongoing access to a growing network of peers, thought leaders, and alumni through collaborative learning experiences. We really believe that we're stronger together, and that together as a community, we can promote equity in the workplace. So and then we celebrate and we recognize employers that are leading by example through third-party certification. One of the things that we really believe in and that I sort of joke about is that we're unabashedly pro peer pressure, right? So as more and more organizations embrace the ideals of diversity, equity, inclusion, we make it more visible, employees understand what that means, then we can raise the boat, raise the tide for all ships, right? Now, given the disproportionate impact of the global pandemic on women in communities of color, as well as the tight labor market and increased competition for talent, there's really no better time to reimagine the workplace. And in fact, in many ways, companies can't afford not to. When we look at the pandemic, and I think we're still in the midst of this and understanding the changes and how this is going to impact the workforce moving forward, we can see that 1 in 4 women are actually thinking of taking a step back from their careers because of the pandemic. A lot of that has to do with the unequal division of childcare. And when we look at promotions, men have actually been promoted 3 times more than women during the pandemic. 34% of men working remotely with kids at home said that they received a promotion compared to only 9% of women. Now, we also know that there's been a disproportionate impact on communities of color. So by June of 2020, Black and Latinx Americans had 12% fewer jobs than in February of 2020, compared to only 7.5% of losses among their white counterparts. And when we think about the transition back to the workplace, even how we're reimagining what that looks like, a lot of organizations are toying with this notion of a hybrid workplace. 97% of Black respondents in a recent survey said they would prefer a fully remote or hybrid workplace moving forward. Only 3% of Black workers surveyed said they wanted to return fully in person, compared to 21% of white workers. Why? Well, for many Black employees, a return to in-person work also means a return to microaggressions or pressures to conform to white standards of professionalism and high rates of workplace stress and burnout. So when we're thinking about even reimagining the workplace in this new era, we have to take into account people's different experiences and viewpoints. Now, the pandemic itself hasn't created these challenges, it's only exacerbated them. And when we look at the labor market pre-pandemic, we can clearly see how bias and systemic inequality has led to gender and racial disparities. So even though 13.4% of Americans are Black, less than 1% of Fortune 500 CEOs are Black. And we know that over half of Americans are women, and yet less than 8% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women. And over the past 20 years, there have been 17 Black Fortune 500 CEOs, only one of whom was a woman. She did retire from Xerox. And last year, Starbucks did hire a Black female CEO, which is an amazing step, but still nowhere near the representation that we need to have. We also know that while overtly prejudicial attitudes have declined over time, hiring discrimination against African Americans hasn't changed since 1990. White applicants still receive 36% more callbacks than equally qualified Black applicants, and 24% more callbacks than Latinx applicants. When we look at sort of what we would call statistical discrimination, sort of this assumption of who's appropriate for what jobs, we can see that when presented with equal performing candidates, men are still 1.5 times more likely to be hired than women. And that's rooted in what we call statistical discrimination. So it's that bias that we have, that we've internalized, that there are certain gender differences in abilities or skill sets. Now, when we couple that with family status, and we've seen that impact hugely over the course of this pandemic, with so many women having to take a step back or losing out on promotions. We know that even pre-pandemic, women were losing 4% of their hourly earnings for each child they had, while fathers were earning 6% more. So we call that the motherhood penalty and the fatherhood bonus. Being a mother can reduce your chances that you'll be offered a job by 37 percentage points. And even when you're within a job or a role, mothers are seen as less confident or competent, offered lower starting salaries, and considered less suitable for promotions than women without kids. Now, this is not just a pipeline issue, right? So in 2019, for the first time, women actually outnumbered men in the college educated workforce. Now, the pandemic had a huge impact on that, but we had made huge strides in representation when it comes to the workforce itself. And yet when we look at the composition of manager roles or even C-suite roles, we can see a drastic drop. So when we look at manager roles, men are making up about 62% of those roles, 38% of women overall, and only 12% of women of color. And the reason I want to talk about these two intersecting identities, gender and race, is because when we look at the college educated workforce, particularly women who are graduating from college, 34% of those women are women of color. So this is not it's not necessarily a pipeline issue. When we look at the composition of C-suite roles, men still make up almost 80% of those roles, with women making up just over 20%. And then for women of color, that drops to a measly 4%. Now, it's not, I think sometimes it's tempting to think that education could be a great equalizer. But as we can see, even with those levels of education, we're not getting representation in those higher paid jobs. And census data also shows that women of color with doctoral degrees are paid less than men with master's degrees. And women of color with master's degrees are paid less than men with bachelor's degrees. So it's not necessarily a pipeline issue. It really is an issue of systemic inequality, and we can do a lot to combat that in our own workplaces. Now, I want to use it, I've used this term before, and some of you may be familiar with this term. Some of you may not be familiar with this term yet, but we talk a lot about an intersectional approach to workplace equity. Intersectionality is basically the overlap of the different identities that we hold. So we have a lot of different identities that we hold. We may identify by our gender, by our race, by our socioeconomic status, maybe by our parental status, or even the type of jobs that we're in. But when we look at the different compounded effects of those things, we talked a little bit before about sort of the dominant culture, like white and male being the default human being. When you have identities that are not default, right, or that are not considered default, that are historically marginalized, and they overlap, this is what we call intersectionality. So for instance, a woman of color is going to experience the workplace much differently than I will, or a woman with a different ability, or a trans employee. Having those different identities overlap to create unique experiences, and we have to understand that as we're designing for equity within the workplace. Now, I want to do a quick activity with you all because I want to demonstrate how this plays out in our workplaces, particularly even from when we're starting a business to growing a business and building our teams. We're talking about high performing teams, right? So I want you all to take a moment. You can do this on your phone. You can grab a piece of paper and a pen, but I want each of you to write down the names of the 6 people you trust most, not including your family members. So take a moment to do that really quickly. Okay, give me a thumbs up when you've got your 6. Okay. So what I want you all to do is put a little check mark by the folks who share some of the similar identities that you have. And I'll go through those, but just put a little mark by the names of the folks who have maybe, we'll start with the same gender. So if anyone on your list shares the same gender as you or the same gender identity as you, put a check mark by their name. Okay, same race. So if the folks on your list share the same race as you, put a check mark by their name. Same nationality. How about the same physical ability as you? Maybe if they share the same religion, put a check mark by their name. The same native language, put a check mark by their name. And if you know this and you know that they share the same sexual orientation as you, put a check mark by their name. So I want to open this up just in the chat. Don't make me call on you. I want to see some participation here. What did you notice about your list? You can either, since we're a smaller group, feel free to unmute and share what you noticed, or if you feel more comfortable, you can also drop it in the chat.
This is Mark. I'll start. I have 1 male, 5 women, 1 white woman, and the person that I had the most in common with was the male.
Great. So it sounds like your list is relatively diverse.
It is.
That's great, Mark. Did other people notice the same thing, or did you have a different experience?
I mean, I think I was almost 100% same on all those. Same
100% same.
as me.
I was half men, half women, but that was the main thing that was different, and then everything else was pretty much the same.
Yep. And Anthony mentioned too, mine are all pretty much the same. Yeah, it's sort of this human tendency to gravitate toward people who are like us, right? So we actually call this affinity bias. It's our tendency to prefer or connect with others who are just like us. So people with similar backgrounds, belief, interest. We've seen this play out a lot over the past year and a half, particularly as we become more polarized, right? When we're on social media, we tend to be fed the same information that we're seeking out. We actually look for confirmation bias. So not only do we surround ourselves by people who look and think and act like us, but we also want to seek out information that confirms what we already believe. So those kinds of biases, that's a natural sort of tendency to prefer connect with others who are like us. That is just one type of cognitive bias that can influence our decision making. And I'll use this example because I think it's so poignant in sort of the startup space. I had a conversation about with a startup who's trying to develop some software that could mitigate bias in the interviewing process. And as we're going through this conversation and they're telling me about how they're building this out, I asked them, well, how many people on your team are people of color? And they had nobody represented. It was a completely white team. So they had some balance of gender, but even when we were thinking about the questions that they were asking within this interviewing framework, it was from a very white perspective, right? White, middle income sort of notion of what professionalism is. So sometimes when we surround ourselves with people who look like us and think like us and act like us, we are not addressing our own blind spots. And that can really diminish the quality and the function of our teams, right? We can't be high performing teams if we have these major blind spots. And so it's really important that we think about redesigning our systems so that we can disrupt some of these biases, right? Whether it be affinity bias or the halo and horns effect, or all different kinds of biases, these cognitive biases that we all have. We have to find ways to redesign our systems to disrupt them so that we can address those blind spots and make sure we're designing workplaces that are going to allow everybody to thrive. That's not only good for business, it's the right thing to do, right? So, we kind of view it as, well, what if we can change things? Well, we absolutely can. And I'm going to share 3 steps with you today that you can take within your own organizations or even bring back. Feel free to share these with other folks as well if you think it can be helpful. But there are 3 things that we can do today within our own organizations to address this. So the first step is really to think about doing a deep audit into your organization's policies and practices. What we're trying to do here is identify and remove any systemic bias, whether that's in recruitment and hiring, employee benefits, performance evaluation, promotion, compensation. One of the best examples of this is referral networks, right? Sometimes a lot of jobs are filled through referral. But can you think of some challenges that might occur if we have affinity bias and we're referring folks? Who are the folks we're referring? They look like us, they act like us, they think like us, right? So it's really important that we kind of take a look in the systems that we have. Where are we recruiting? Where are we looking for these candidates? We can also look at some other tangible examples when we're thinking about interviews, making sure that we're objectifying those interviews as much as possible so it's not a subjective experience. So using the same set of questions and a scoring rubric for each candidate, asking those questions in the same order, really designing the interview process to disrupt bias. We can also combat that motherhood penalty that we talked about before by making sure we're offering and actively encouraging new parents of all genders to take equal amounts of paid parental leave. I often use this example. Sometimes unintentionally we think, oh, we're really going to help new mothers in the workplace. We'll give them 12 weeks of parental leave. We'll give them some flexibility around their work arrangements. But they don't also do the same for parents of other genders, including men. And so when promotions come up and when we're thinking about face time in the office, we have that inequity, right? We can see promotions going to fathers more than mothers. So it's really important that we're encouraging parents of all genders to take equal amounts of paid parental leave to share that caregiving. But we also want to pay attention to group composition, aiming to include at least 20% of any underrepresented group on a team or on an interview panel. Any type of group that you're putting together, you want to aim for at least 20%. And in fact, that data that I shared with you earlier about board membership, you really don't get the benefits of diversity on your board unless you have at least 3 people represented from any one group. And because usually when you're only 1 or 2 people, you become a token, right? So your voice isn't actually heard. We can actually see this show up in the performance evaluation. So women actually receive lower quality performance evaluations when they represent less than 20% of a group. But research also shows that being the only woman or the only person of color decreases your chances of success and actually increases the likelihood that your colleagues will have a more biased and stereotypical view of you. So group composition is really important. It can be key. And you'll remember that stat that I shared with you in the beginning, that if there's only 1 woman or 1 person of color, they have no chance of getting hired. If you increase that by 1, so say you have 2 women or 2 people of color in that final candidate pool of 4, you can actually increase the chances of hiring a woman or a person of color to 50%. It jumps to at least 50%. So it becomes representative of the candidate pool itself. So group composition is key. Now, step number 2, We talked about that notion of intersectionality and what that means, how people's different identities that they hold can influence how they experience the workplace. So we want to make sure that no matter what we're doing in our organization, we're taking an intersectional framework. We want to uncover any disparities in employee experience. If you conduct any employee surveys or you do engagement surveys or things like that, make sure you're disaggregating that data by social categorization. Because when you only look at it overall, someone's voice could be drowned out if they tend to be underrepresented on the team. So we really want to make sure we understand how different people are experiencing the workplace in different ways, so that we can identify key insights and then prioritize those opportunities for growth. And then finally, step 3, we want to set data-driven diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. Everything should be based on the impact of the experiences of your employees. We want to make sure we're measuring our results. We always encourage transparency. So be transparent within your organization about the strengths that you have, as well as the opportunities for growth. Invite employees at all levels to the decision-making table. You can actually start to combat that homogenous team groupthink by making sure you've got diverse voices at the table. Develop tangible action plans, put specific milestones and benchmarks to them, and then hold leaders accountable. We don't often say that sort of our financial objectives are a nice to have, right? So if we're really going to be successful at increasing diversity, equity, inclusion in our workplaces, it has to be a strategic priority. And then, of course, continually measure, learn, and act. As you put these milestones into place, did you meet them? If so, that's great. What was the impact? If not, why not? What can you do differently? So making sure that you're really putting some strategy behind this. So what can you expect to receive, in terms of results when you redesign the workplace with an equity lens? Well, I want to share a story with you just to demonstrate the impact that you can have. I want to introduce you to Kyle. Kyle is the VP of HR at a leading cultural institution in town, a member of one of our very first cohorts. As a result of going through QCC in 2018, his organization completely reimagined its benefits policies and practices. They spent the last 2 years really rethinking how they do things. And he recently shared with me that job candidates actually bring up certification in interviews, that he's had a lot of people turn down higher paid positions with other employers because of his organization's commitment to meeting people where they are and the unique needs of its employees. So not only has recruitment improved for his organization, but he's seen significant reductions in employee turnover. So when you start to put people first, when you really look at things through an equity lens, you can have major impact on your organizations. So if you're ready to reimagine the workplace, I encourage you to learn more. You can visit our website at queencitycertified.com. Our newsletter has a lot of really helpful information, including our blog posts. We have a lot of access to free resources that could be helpful to your organization. If you're ready to learn more or join an upcoming cohort, you can do that as well. And then I will also drop a 3-step action plan in the chat for you to download that you can take with you and share with anyone within your organization if that's helpful for you all today. So I know that we're sort of right at time. I think we have a little bit of time for Q&A. Do we have a little bit of time, Paul? So I thank you so much for your time and attention. I'd be happy to answer any questions you all have.
Yeah, so who has questions for Nicole?
I just have a statement that, Nicole, that was a well-delivered and informative presentation. It was very helpful.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
For a typical, so I've got a question on like time to see how long does it take, so to speak, right? For an organization to, I wouldn't say realize they have a problem, but maybe like say, hey, you know what, I want to make this a priority, to then, hey, you've got kind of a supporter, right? That wants to kind of take a bit more of a dedicated, like active approach to making or influencing their own organization, making a change, to then getting people on board, going through a process to, take this 3-step action plan to then start to see results. I mean, what's a typical, it might not be anything that's typical, but like, what's that kind of like user journey, so to speak, that you've seen typically?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it depends on where the organization is starting. So we've seen, so our goal is to really meet employers where they are. So some folks are just starting off on their journey. They really don't have a DEI strategy in place quite yet. It's something that they've been talking about. Other organizations have been working on it maybe for a few years, but they're not seeing the results that they're looking for. So it really depends on where they're starting. I would say that the key to success for any organization to seeing impact is buy-in from leadership. It has to come from the top. And oftentimes, even when we're talking to organizations around their DEI strategy, sometimes it's tempting to task one person with that job, right? So sometimes it's been tasked to HR. Sometimes folks will have an in-person DEI executive. In some ways, an executive. Sometimes it's not even in a primary leadership role. But it has to be an organization-wide initiative. And that's where it comes back to really saying, who are the change champions within the organization who are going to move this work forward? And then how do we hold ourselves accountable? So we've seen organizations make changes in as little as 6 months. We had one organization increase the representation of people of color on their leadership team by 5% within 6 months. We had one organization increase the representation of female attorneys by 20%. That took them about a year and a half to get to that number. So it really just depends on where you put the priorities, how you actually implement and roll out those structures, and the levels of accountability that you have. We generally, because certification is good for 2 years, it's usually enough time to say, okay, we've rolled out and we've implemented some of the action plans that we have, and now we can measure the impact. So instead of trying to address every challenge at the same time, we really want organizations to focus in on a few key challenges, a few key of those priorities that came up from their own specific data, and then start measuring that over the course of 2 years. But 2 years is usually a good amount of time, but sometimes there's low-hanging fruit, so you can see impact immediately. I also think it goes a long way to be transparent with your employees, right? So as you're going on this journey, I often tell organizations, employees already know what the challenges are. So even if you do an employee survey, or you have, we have organizations host listening sessions, they already know some of the challenges. So just acknowledging what those challenges are and then being transparent about how you're going to address them can go a long way in increasing employee engagement and satisfaction. But really, it comes down to that accountability. Do you have those measures in place? Because that's how you're going to move things forward.
Cool. We have time for one more question.
And Paul, I'm trying to share in the chat. I don't know if I can share a file in the chat. If not, what I'll do is I'll email this action plan to you if you want to share it out with participants. Okay.
Definitely. One thing I really enjoyed is obviously the simplicity of a 3-step process, and you had tons of data that just kind of served up why it's an issue, why there's a problem, and why people should care, right? But one critical kind of thing that I thought you highlighted really well was that intersectionality piece, because it's so easy to just do an overarching survey and not double click enough into the spaces that you need to go and understand where there might be differences, right? And so it's easy for someone to kind of do something and go, oh, look, we're doing great.
Yeah. 80% of our staff
without like double clicking down and saying, hey, wait a minute though, let's, dig down and uncover more there. So
absolutely. And one thing that we always, you often hear the term diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it's actually a little bit backwards, because equity has to be the foundation. That's the systems that we're creating, right? We're reviewing it, we're embracing difference, we're understanding difference, and we're redesigning the workplace in response to that difference. That can then help us build a more inclusive workplace that enables us to attract a more diverse talent pool. But if we focus solely on attracting a more diverse talent pool first, then oftentimes people won't stay. So you'll see higher levels of turnover because we haven't put the systems in place to make sure that they feel like they belong, that their voice is included, and that there's opportunities to advance in the organization. So actually, when we're thinking about this work, if you think of like EID versus DEI, it's a much better framework when we're thinking of where to start.
Cool. Thanks, Nicole.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time.
All right, so we're going to shift it over to Bob. Bob is going to talk about how to build high-performing teams. He, as I said at the outset, is the CEO of Hearty, and he exited a little over a year ago the company called Ahology. And so he's got a lot of great insights. Always love talking to Bob, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Anthony. You guys have been great supporters and helpers and testers and experimenters with us. Appreciate it. Let me pull up my screen. Let's see. Oh, there it is. So, I mean, basically the theme, I mean, I love this kind of double theme here of how to build great organizations. I think one of the things that's really neat too with this group is, as far as I understand, you guys are all, we are all at pretty earlier stages of the process of building our companies. And I think one thing that's important to know is that a lot of the choices that we make at these early stages will live with us and be very embedded for the rest of our company's lives. And if we can make these better choices early, they can avoid pain and hopefully get to more growth, more profit, more revenue if we do them well. And I think I'll just kind of give you my again, kind of hit my background already, but the summary of how I got here, I think, I think my teams and I have developed a pretty good way of building organizations, and that's come through both, good and bad decisions over the years. As Paul said, I started off in the Procter world as a brand manager working in new products, which is kind of a neat, entrepreneurial side of a big company. And then I left and joined some friends to be an executive at a digital agency that was called Bridge, that we grew and sold to WPP, a big global agency holding company, and then started Ahology right after that. Sold that to Quotient Technology, a public marketing tech company. That was the one that just ended a little over a year ago. The $50 million each on those, both in Cincinnati. Both were about 8-year runs for each. And in that process, hired hundreds of people at the center of knowledge work and digital work, people that were extremely talented. Some we pulled from outside, some we were homegrown right out of college. And I'd say the thing I've learned more and more over time and getting some success is that culture can be a competitive advantage, and it really was in all three of those companies. We sold different things, we did different things, it was different types of work, but that's the one thing I've learned, and I think the thing that's most missing. So what I wanted to share today is really that kind of blueprint of 4 elements that I believe are key to getting that high performance organization, that it doesn't matter what you sell, whether it's cryptocurrency or sand, sitting on the river. If you get this right, you can build an amazing business. And I think this is increasingly, as you get your company off the ground of whatever you're making, your job as a leader moves from helping figure out the product, getting the product market fit, and more around figuring out how to be an engineer of the organization. And so that's what I want to share and hit on today. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit about what I'm working on now that is related to this, and I think could have some relevance for your groups. The first piece, I always kind of start with this, and hopefully what this comes to mind when I show you is the classic kind of company org chart, where we've seen this many times, many companies. There's a CEO at the top, there's the executive team, there's the middle management, and there's the worker bees at the bottom. And almost every company has this kind of organization and shows an org chart in this way. But this first thing I believe is that what we really are doing and need to do is change the mentality so that this turns around. And the top of any organization is really the people who are on the ground, meeting with clients, writing code, producing the product, delivering the service. They are the ones that are the top of the org chart. And we as managers or leaders are there to support them. And that mentality gets into that first kind of leg of the school here, which is giving people the ownership. And the mentality to have here is that, even at the most junior level, we are hiring people to do a job, and we need to give them the freedom, the ownership, and accountability to do that. And so that means if you as a manager if you're doing the work, something's wrong. And this happens all the time. A lot of managers get there because they're good at doing work, but they don't know how to trust and become more of that servant leader. So this is what ownership does, is when you say, let's take the junior person and give them the accountability and responsibility. Why to do that? Several reasons. The first is they're close to the client, they're close to the product. They should be able to make the best, fastest decisions because they're right there. And they see that in real time versus waiting for an email, waiting to write a memo, waiting for your response. Also, when you give people that ownership, they rise to the occasion many times. They learn to make better decisions because they're the ones who have to live with them. And this even is more important after they make a mistake. We learn from our mistakes. If people are repeating mistakes, then you've got a problem there. But giving people enough rope so that, they're going to mess up once in a while, but knowing that as owners, they're going to feel the pain, learn from it, and get better from there. Another part of ownership kind of goes to this idea that, if you whenever you're in a situation where you don't have clear ownership, that's going to lead to failure. If everybody owns something, reality is no one does. And when a number's not being hit, when a deadline's not being hit, when a client's not satisfied, you kind of can point the fingers at each other and then nothing's really getting done. So having that clear owner and trying to push that ownership down as much as possible to more junior people, huge key, and really what human beings like. We love to have the ownership. We love to be able to make decisions, live with it even with our mistakes, and we will rise to those occasions. The second piece comes in, and I think, so this presentation is based on both what I've learned as being an entrepreneur and building teams, but also selling a couple of companies and then suddenly working for someone else, which is a lot less fun, I'll tell you that right now. And one example of how you feel that is I remember at my last company when we were under an earnout and I had a boss for 18 months, once a week I would get a question from him on email or text, and he would go, hey, could you give me this number, of something? And I would just sit there and just get frustrated with that. And, here's another number he wants. Here's another number he wants. And I remember sitting there and trying to be a good self-observer. I remember going to myself and saying, why is that so frustrating to me? Why am I pissed that he's just asking these seemingly random questions? And what I realized is that I want to know why. It doesn't feel great when someone's asking for something or making an order, but not giving the why. Why is this important? Why are we doing this? Why are you asking this? And it really comes into just human respect. We're not automatons here. We're not machines. Even if, it is somebody 4 levels up, we want to understand as humans, what is this about? And so that's what gets into being that why gets into, my opinion, transparency. We throw that word around, transparency. The reason why to have transparency is a few things. The first is if someone on your team who works for you doesn't know the reason for that change or request, they do assume the worst. Am I in trouble? Are we going to have cuts? Are you doubting me? Like all those things come into play. That there's lots of data that says, negative, we are programmed as humans to jump to negative conclusions 10 times more than positive conclusions. So that innocent request, which you can do because you're the leader, leads to negative churn and stress among the person that you're asking to, usually needlessly. It's just because you haven't explained that. Another good positive of being transparent is the more people know, the better decisions they can make in real time. And so think of, hey, I wonder if you could give me this number because I'm thinking that we could do a better job on X, Y, or Z, and I'm just playing with an idea. And imagine you ask someone that, and not only do they feel better, okay, got it, now I understand. They might go, oh, you're working on that. I've got an idea for you on that project. Or here's something I've been thinking about too. Or, oh, I'd love to, let me get the data and then maybe we could talk about it. So much more productive once you kind of bring somebody in by being transparent. And this also leads to syncing input. Just overall, it's better decisions. So if you're sharing what you're doing and being transparent about what you're working on, where you want the company to go, the positives and negatives, that can lead to just more input. So the more you share, the more input you get, and the more better decisions you might make. And then overall, it's just kind of this idea that even in, if you're an early stage company, you're going to have the ups and downs. Sometimes as a leader, you feel like you need to, not share this, or that people are going to quit if we're, sharing more about how much cash we have in the bank, or that this client is frustrated. Let's insulate them. The reality is that openness and honesty, it's just, people want that. And again, they'll jump to conclusions if you're not being transparent. And then for you as a leader, if you're trying to hide things, that causes stress for you, because now you're wondering about, who can I tell? Who can't I? What if this gets out? You know what? It's just a lot less stressful to be open and honest about it, and take it as it comes. The third element came from something I learned in working with a client at my agency several years ago. Was Red Bull. And I had a good friend there who he was a client of ours at a previous company, and then he moved over to Red Bull and brought us in as an agency on that company. And we had built a friendship over the years, and he was like, Bob, I got to tell you about the hiring process at Red Bull that he had just gone through successfully. And he learned that in the interview process there, all of the questions try to get at whether or not the candidate has within them a characteristic that matches the 10 different characteristics or equity points of Red Bull. For example, one of the internal equity points of Red Bull is mystery. Anything about Red Bull has to have a little bit of mystery. That's part of their DNA and how they do things. And so they wanted to make sure they hire people that also have a little bit of mystery. And really weird thing to do. And then kind of in their process, I think they have 4 or 5 people interview you. They barely look at your resume and your skills. All the questions are trying to get at these, do you share, the brand, your personality with the brand personality? And if just one of the people who interview you don't think you have one of those characteristics, you're not going to get the job. One example of how that came into play, he told me a few years later, is they had a new, the business in the U.S. was kind of suffering. They fired the head of North America, and they brought in someone else who was an older, kind of longer term Red Bull executive. And the person came in, and the first thing that he did was said, I'm canceling all of our strategy meetings. We hired you because you know the brand. Just go do what you think is right. Who else says that? No one else. I've never heard a story like that before. But when you have people who are the brand, they'll do that. And we saw that, like in Red Bull, by far the most interesting client creatively. They were coming up with ideas. They had us as an agency more as partners to bounce things with, not as like an outsourcing of the creative ideas. And that's led to them being a very powerful brand. And so this gets into your business. What I'd say is this is where you're looking for values. Do the values of the people, setting the values for your company, and then bringing in people who share those values. So there's the piece of that is that if we have some beliefs about how we want to work and some skills, and we have similar likes, that can make better decisions that go with what the brand is looking for and better work that we're doing together. And so this can come, from lots of different things. It can come from just like the type of business that you're in. It can come from product differentiation. I think that, this is a different way of looking at recruiting. Obviously, it's the interview process, as I said, but it's also being very transparent about, hey, this is a company for people who like X. We at my company Hearty, we created I think it was like a 20-page manifesto of what it's like to work here that we put on our website. And it was very much like we hoped that people would get excited that, oh, this company, this is what it's really like here. That's me. We also hope people would read it and decide not to apply because we weren't what they were looking for. And again, that saves a lot of people time on both elements there. And so some of the things that were in our Ahology values that we interviewed for were things like creativity. We were an influencer marketing technology company. It was a key differentiation of us is to have higher quality creative. That's one of the reasons we were growing and beating our competition. And so our mentality was we want to bring in people who have a creative spark. Doesn't mean they're all designers or photographers or, but they have something creative. Like they've got an itch to create something. It almost didn't matter what it was, but in their sphere, they were creative thinkers and could appreciate that. We also needed people who were curious. So that was a value that we were looking for. And again, how you see that in the business is we were innovative. We were taking the current influencer marketing world and adding more innovation to it versus our competitors. And that starts with people who are just like curious about how the world works. And so those were interview questions of, tell me about a time when you were curious about something and brought a new idea. Could be anything, in work, out of work. Another one was we called two companies in a row, my two entrepreneurial companies, we valued this one, productive paranoia. And think of this as, I think I stole this from Microsoft many years ago. Bill Gates supposedly had this and helped them, keep navigating through major changes like the rise of the internet and browsers and that kind of thing. But productive paranoia is not good. It's a fear of what might happen tomorrow. The productive version of it is giving some thought ahead to what could go wrong. And again, it's more of an asset or a strength than a stopping point where you go, this would lead to things like we have a new client coming in, a new CMO. What could go wrong? Well, CMOs tend to want to make change. CMOs might have favorite partners that they like working with somewhere else. Okay, this is a flag being raised. This is a threat to us. Now, how do we get ahead of that? All right, let's have a meeting right away. Let's put some fresh ideas in front of the CMO. Let's do some digging to see, how they like to work. Let's get our juices, up and ready to meet what could be a challenge down the road by being kind of a little bit paranoid ahead of the game. So again, this would be something that we would ask questions about. Tell me about a time in whatever job you had where you thought ahead to something that could go wrong and planned to ahead in case it did. So those kinds of things all together, you're getting a feel for, does the person fit with what's been working for us in terms of our values? What this does not mean is generic words that every company should have. This is how 99% of the companies out there do things like integrity is one of our values. That's just something every human should have. That's like, we tell the truth. That's not a value. That's just a basic thing. And if that's what you're saying is a special value, often it's really not the reality. And every company I've seen that's, I think Enron had integrity as a value, and we see how that worked out. It also doesn't mean people who look the same, act the same, everything that Nicole just talked about, that's not, what we're not, values can still bring in a lot of diverse perspectives and backgrounds. But, this is where, hey, we all need to be creative. We all need to have some curiosity. And that can come with people with, lots of different backgrounds across the board. The last piece is, it's really about putting that all together. And I keep getting, in the startup world, I can't help but be drawn to the analogy of a ship in the waves on some kind of journey. Think about it as you're all stuck on this thing. You're going somewhere. You've got this crew of people that you have to rely on, everybody doing their role, working together. It's not a huge, massive Titanic type of company, even those have problems. You've got waves. You don't know what's around the corner. The weather might be good. It might be bad. And the last piece of this is this concept of, okay, we've got this boat, we're on it. Where are we headed? And that's really getting into the vision that you set as the leader of a company for where you're going. And again, this just goes back to human nature. We all want something more than a paycheck or to hit a quarterly goal. We work the vast majority of our lives, most of the waking hours of the day, we're in a job. We want something that's more than just a paycheck. And so, the more that we all know and believe in where we're going, again, we make those smarter, faster decisions on our own every day. If we know where we're headed, we don't have to ask for permission. We can come up with creative solutions. It's just amazing. Now, the vision doesn't mean it's easy. It's not an annual plan. It's not in hitting this quarter's revenue goal. It's about what's something that's going to take a lot of time, be difficult to achieve. And hopefully something that's about making a real positive dent in the universe. I'd like to say, if your company wasn't here, the world would be worse measurably. Doesn't mean, in giant ways, but that's really why you're here. It's not just let's make some money. It's let's do something incredible that others haven't or can't do. And whatever your niche is, you can do it. So setting that and talking about it is key. So putting those four things together has led to a lot of great results for us. I think it fits really well too with where the world is going now. And you're thinking about your team and team building. One piece is every piece of work that can be automated or can be offshored. Every time you do that, there's work remaining. And it's knowledge work, it's thinking work, it's creative work. And that's the work where the people are more important, and high-performing people become a bigger lever for success or threat to failure if you don't get that right. And also, it's a world where yesterday's skills, resumes, whatever people have done in the past, honestly, the rate of change means that what happened in the past is a lot less value. It's really about people with raw talent, raw skills, motivating them, getting into their passions. Again, some of those, if you're looking at past accomplishments, you could argue that it's negative value because people are often stuck in the past and think, the future is just doing what they did before. Meanwhile, we see this right now, the demand for top talent is rising. All those knowledge work jobs that are there, as we've automated a bunch of stuff, that's only increasing. The reality is the supply of talent is shrinking. So the millennial generation was some of the biggest groups of graduates from college. Now it's shrinking. Just people coming out of college. It's not about college graduation rates. It's just the population is shrinking. People are leaving the workforce for various reasons. So there's more demand on finding great talent. And the options are really, I think, one of two. You can either try to pay the most money and attract people who are looking for the most money, or you can build a place that brings humanity to work, that people want to work there. Yeah, competitive pay, of course, competitive benefits, but thinking this is a place where I'm bringing more of myself out. I'm feeling challenged. I'm working with people that I love working with. That's a priceless thing that is both great in the business and then translates into amazing business results if you get it right. And so I'll just talk a little bit about that led us into our company Hearty, which probably a lot of you guys have heard about. This is where we sold our companyology, and a couple of us said, hey, we love doing the startup thing. Let's do something that tries to scale some of these things we've learned in building organizations. And with that, we decided that a key thing for us was working our networks to find amazing talent that other people on a very broad basis have telling us fit with what we're looking for and would be great for us to work with. And yet we also saw that it's getting harder and harder to find great people. It's hard to ask your network for help. LinkedIn is a mess. Most connections on LinkedIn are not real relationships. And it's hard to just ask people for help. Who do you ask? You know, when you're hiring for X role, you got to go through a process and say, who knows people? Who's going to respond to me? What form of media should I ask them to respond in? And Nicole made a great point that when you tell someone, hey, who do you know? That immediate question, you tend to only think of a couple of people, and you tend to immediately think of only the people that are close to you and look like you. And so that led us to say, let's create a new solution, a new professional recommendation network that's all about recognizing and representing proven talent. And so Hearty's think of a professional social network, an app where members come in and we are recommending the people that we know and trust to leaderboards around skills and interests and roles. And that helps build up reputation that's really been missing in LinkedIn and other places. So just show you real quick, like how to use it. And this kind of is an emotive, say if you're looking to hire someone, this could be a full-time hire, it could be a freelancer. We've got leaderboards for investors. We've got leaderboards for startup finance people, part-time CFOs, lawyers who know startups, IP experts. I mean, we've got a ton of different folks, mostly in Cincinnati so far, but we have definite plans to expand. But anyway, say if you're looking for a software developer, you go on to Hearty, go to the leaderboards and search for software. From here, you can see the examples of software-related leaderboards that we have. You can then go in to say the software engineers leaderboard. Click on that, and you can see this list of crowdsourced people that have been recommended by the peers that they have worked with. So they're listed in order of how many recommendations that you've received. But it's definitely, so there's a little bit of a competitive element, but it's more in fun. Everybody who's on this list has been recommended by somebody. So really everybody's a winner to some extent. And you can go in, let's say you look at Gerard, for example, looks interesting. He's the top of the leaderboard. You can click on his profile within the leaderboard and see the people that have commented on him. It's a great way to see, kind of taking a little bit of that piece of LinkedIn, but make it very leaderboard specific. And then you can click on recommendations and see the list of, here's these 34 people that have recommended Gerard. Part of the idea here is that you're looking for people that you know and trust. And this gets over the LinkedIn issue of what's a connection. Gerard and I literally have 300 connections on LinkedIn in common. Where would I start? With Hearty, you can come in and say, oh, Colin recommended Gerard. Colin is putting his reputation on the line. Colin is saying, I know him well and I trust him. And so when I see that, and if I know Colin well, I can be confident that, hey, that's probably a good recommendation. If I like Colin and Colin likes Gerard, and Colin is where I should start to ask for an intro or ask for, hey, what do you know about Gerard? Do you think he might be looking for this kind of role? Do you know if he's open to freelance? That's the kind of thing that we can get at with Hearty, with this recommendation as a sign of a real relationship. From here, you can go through. Everybody has a profile on Hearty. Here the idea is if LinkedIn is your self-promotion and your resume, Hearty is your reputation. Hearty is defined by here's what other people are recommending you for. And so here you can go in and see 52 total people have recommended for one of the leaderboards. You can see the other leaderboards that he's on. One of the neat things you can do here is you can see, okay, obviously he's a software engineer, but he's also an active member of the Startup Cincy community. That's cool. If he's active in the community, he's probably up for being a mentor. He's probably up for, taking a meeting. If you're looking for some advice, this is the type of person who's a giver. He's a helpful person in the community. And so, he might be a good person to just talk to or ask for help on. Then you can go in and obviously see his LinkedIn at the bottom of that. You can see other communities that he's involved with. And then if you want to send him a message, you can go up there, send him a DM. Most people do have open DMs. If not, you can ask for an intro to talk to Gerard, and we'll help arrange that. And so all of that is like how we're crowdsourcing these recommendations to help you get and connect with awesome people that you need to help grow your business. The last piece I think is kind of cool, and this is something really new that Anthony and Paul jumped in early with us, is that we're looking for other ways that we can help other professional networks. And so this group, your group at HCDC, you guys are a professional network. You know, you're running your own businesses, but you're part of the HCDC family. What we're doing on Hearty with HCDC and other groups like the American Marketing Association, even like the Technology Drink Up and another dozen groups, we're saying if you come in and you can activate your membership with that community on Hearty. And so here for HCDC, for example, you can go down and see, oh, who else in HCDC is part of Hearty? What are the leaderboards that HCDC members are in? Like, for example, you might say, oh, I need to find a marketing strategy. I need some help with marketing strategy. Well, you could start with HCDC here and see that, you know, there's, I think that's probably Paul, who has gotten 7 recommendations for marketing strategy. So if you didn't know already, he's a marketing guru. You could reach out to him. He's already part of your HCDC family. Obviously, he's probably going to reply. You can also do this from the leaderboards. You can see if you have a shared group, and that could be something where you go, oh, I don't know you, but we're both in HCDC together, and I see you recommended this website freelancer. What did you think? Would you mind making an intro? You know, that kind of thing. So I'll put this in the comments here in a second, but if you're not on Hearty yet, you can use this link, you can join, and then you'll automatically get opted into the HCDC community also.
So it says when I went there that you get waitlisted or whatever.
Yeah, if you go to, did you just go to like the regular Hearty website?
Yeah.
Just hang on and it'll either activate you, or if you use this link.
All right, I'll use that link. Okay.
Yeah, use this link. You'll go right through. What else? So just some things we're doing so far. I mean, I think we're pretty close to critical mass for a ton of key roles in Cincinnati. We've had over 1 million LinkedIn imports. Actually, I need to adjust that. We're at 31,000 total recommendations by members. About, it's hard to see exactly what's happening. I mean, it's, but we've got evidence of at least 50 jobs getting filled because we existed. So we're making a dent so far. And then we're also starting to help some companies kind of, if you're needing some help besides this kind of on the service side, we're starting to help out some companies that are doing searches. That's more like a referral type fee versus a headhunter type fee. So happy to chat about that as well. But, any questions, thoughts on any of this that I shared?
Any questions? And I've got a couple, but I want to open it up to others first.
And I just put that link into the chat.
So one quick kind of comment or plug for Hearty that's twofold. First, one of the things I like about it is oftentimes we get asked, like Anthony and I get asked, and Trish, like people at HCDC get asked, hey, I'm looking for a blank, right? A software developer, a CFO, a CEO, whatever, right? Well, what I like about it is it's easier to go and click on a leaderboard to then go and say, okay, here's all the people that could be a potential place for you to go and like reach out to and interact with. And it almost gives you a preset way to go find others. And then to Bob's point, you can cross-reference to see if you have mutual connections or, how many recommendations they have, et cetera. But it kind of makes that job of like finding somebody easier. And then the second thing is the HCDC organization on Hearty is really intended to kind of like connect people that are both current clients, but also there's other people that are outside of the HCDC kind of current clients, but have been clients in the past and they might not be on our Mighty network yet, and so it helps kind of make link ups and connections to other places that can happen more easily or organically outside of our own kind of controlled Mighty network, so to speak. So,
And I just like a couple other things, Paul, you made me think of is just other other ways that people are using us, even besides finding people to hire. I've had two VCs that I know come to me and say, "Hey, I'm coming to town. Which startup should I meet with?" And I'm able to go, "Here's the top founders leaderboard in Cincinnati." And literally, it makes it easy for he and his team to go through and say, "Oh, here's a bunch of companies I've never heard of that they're not on Crunchbase. There's no other list." And literally, that's leading to meetings that wouldn't have happened. I had a group that was putting together. That's a great one. Like Centrifuge got the box at the FC Cincinnati game, and they're trying to bring in some digital marketing experts for digital marketing startups. Went to the digital marketing leadership leaderboard on Hearty, invited clients to the event, that led to conversations that would have happened. I've got multiple people have said, I've been looking for speakers for an event. I'm able to go through, find people that I wouldn't have found, find the diverse speakers that I wouldn't have found, different perspectives, because we've got those lists. So it's kind of like, the theme is get on, recommend the people that you love working with. When you do that, we actually put you in front of them. So you get more recommendations as you're more active. And it's these little things that are adding up as more people are using it, more people are on. It's about being discovered and discovering people in a way that, really hasn't been possible or easy before.
One comment and said, I did not see neither Nicole's nor Bob's deck in advance. So it's pure reaction to what I thought was a really good point on Bob's, just like Nicole's point on the importance of intersectionality, but the importance of why, just from a couple of experiences that I wanted to share, both from kind of like being in like the employee's shoes, right? But then also like the leader's shoes. So like first from the employee's shoes, I always found that like going and having the strength to go ask whoever my boss was or whoever my leader was, like why they wanted something was critical, because it actually helped me understand what they were trying to do. And then I could even come back oftentimes to Bob's point and say like, well, if you're looking for that, right, we've got this right here, right? Does that answer your question? And it would even drive efficiency, because you could provide an alternative way to answer a question that might scratch the itch, and then engage in a conversation to gain more insight on where they were going or what they wanted. And then the second thing is having like I'm a big context person, and so like I like to share more context when I ask for certain things. And typically it's because when I found that I share more context with why I might be asking for something with somebody that's like a team member on my team, then they oftentimes will come back with a better answer than I probably could have created or found on my own, or they do it faster. And so they end up, so I remember when I was at Gallo Winery, we would always have these monthly board meetings with the CEO, and I always shared where the agenda was going, what we were trying to accomplish, and what we were trying to like the messages we were trying to convey. It made all the data request questions that much easier to get answers on more quickly. And it didn't come with transactional mumbo jumbo as much. So anyway, love that part. Any questions for Bob?